Hey fruit friends, it is spring in Las Vegas and a wonderful time of the year to enjoy the yard and to learn a lot about your plants and trees. One of the most important things that we can do as we start learning how to prune trees is you have to understand where your fruit comes from. And I have a pet peeve when I see a blog spot or a video that's titled How to Prune Fruit Trees. Because there's no one single way. There might be some universal techniques, but there's no one way to prune every fruit tree. And the basis of that is you have to know where your fruit is coming from. Now, this is my Alberta peach tree. It may not look like yours does. That don't matter. I have a tendency to over prune. I'm a Edward Scissorhands sometimes. But this tree had some borers in it last year. It looks like that managed to save it, but I pruned it up pretty thin, and I traditionally do. You know, peach trees put on a lot of growth in the summer, and they need a lot of pruning, a lot of thinning out. But if yours don't look like this, it doesn't matter. You'll get the technique down. But I can't come out and make a video of how to prune a fruit tree and do it on a peach, and then you take that same information and go prune your apple tree, because they fruit totally differently. If you prune an apple tree like you prune a peach tree, you may not get any fruit, and vice versa. But peaches will produce their fruit on last year's new growth. So anything you see on a peach tree that you're looking at right now is not going to produce one fruit next year. It's the growth that's coming on it right now and all through summer that will produce your fruit. Having said that, once it produces that fruit, it's not going to put on another flower again out of that same place. Don't let that confuse you, because let's say this is an old branch that won't produce a flower bud, but it will produce offshoots here that can produce a flower bud. But you've got to understand that all of this where there's flowers and fruit setting was last year's growth, and now it's given us our fruit. So what we want to do, and I want to do, this is my favorite time and most productive time to prune my peach tree. And let me try to clarify something. Most of the structural pruning of trees is done when they're dormant. So if you're using hand pruners, you can use these any time of the year. You're not going to damage the tree or any dead branches, crossing branches, things that you missed while you're pruning. Any time of the year you can use this. If you're going to use loppers or a saw, that's better done when the trees are dormant. But don't hesitate to prune when your tree needs it. Don't matter what time of the year that it is. But using your hand pruners, don't hesitate to use those any time. But what I want to do by pruning this time of the year is, I can see exactly where my fruit is everywhere, and I want to generate new growth this year for my production of fruit next year. You have to think a little bit ahead about it. And will it happen naturally? Sure. I mean, this tree can just continue to grow and put on new growth, and then there's going to be fruit. But obviously you can tell I'm going to keep my structure small. That's another reason for pruning. And I want to keep it contained. I just don't want it to be a big, huge tree in the long haul. So everything I'm doing here today is focused on producing new growth for the rest of the summer for fruit next year. And will there be some thinning of the fruit while I'm doing this? Yes, that's not the main intent of it for me. There'll be naturally, I'm going to cut some fruit away, but I'll save the thinning of the fruit. Let's say some of this, there's too much fruit right here. You want about 6 inches, 8 inches, something like that between your fruit on peaches. Now, that's not the same on apricots. That's totally different. But on peaches, nectarines, anything that has a big fruit, you want enough space for that fruit to fully develop. And hey, if you don't want to do that, you want a whole lot of fruit, that's fine. More than likely it's going to be smaller. But you're going to hear me as I go around here using that term. I'm generating new growth. And also, if we have growth on here that did not produce any fruit, it's useless to us. So I want to get rid of it. Also, I can spot some things on here that I missed while I was winter pruning, such as some dead branches and some crossing branches and things like that. This tree is not pruned perfectly. Your tree is not going to be pruned perfectly. I can look on here and see a lot of mistakes. I'm going to correct some of it, and I'm going to leave some of it. But let's start with this limb right here. Anytime you don't want fruit on the end of branches. These smaller tips out here, if there's fruit on this, that's usually not a good thing. But also with a peach, if you've got this much growth that doesn't have fruit on it, or a limb that doesn't have any fruit at all, that's a useless limb. Let's start it over again, okay? But I'm going to take, even though you don't want fruit on the end of your branches, I come in and cut back here to the first fruit. Now that fruit is on structurally a larger portion of the branch and will be okay, but it's probably going to be thinned out later as I go along. Now, what did I do there? When you prune, you promote new growth. So there will be another branch that comes out of that, or probably two. And when those two branches come out, that's producing the growth that this tree needs to give me fruit next year. So that's just one immediate thing you can do, is come right back and prune back to your first fruit. Now, if you've got, here's where you will do some natural thinning on the tree. There's a lot of space already in between these blooms here, and then this one up here on the end. It's at a part of the branch that I don't want to continue growing out here. So this, in this case, if I come back to first fruit or first bloom on it, we're here. This particular case, I'll choose to come back to this one and cut this limb off that's not leafed out or doing anything. Now see, I can tell a lot better in spring. I can see a lot of things that I couldn't see when this tree was dormant. There's a bud. I'm leaving that to potentially produce a fruit. Here's a limb that has nothing on it till we get halfway down the limb. I'm going to cut that back, leave those three little fruits that are set there, and promote new growth. I'm going to try to do this a little bit quickly. Once I do the first one, I can determine, do I want to come on back on this limb and start selectively taking off that growth, or selectively taking off some fruit to do some early thinning? Sure. Now, I've learned in Las Vegas not to thin my trees until the end of April. Our winds are pretty strong here, especially. You know, typically we think of March winds, but April is a lot of times our windiest month. So I thinned my fruit in March before, then the April winds come, and I had about half the fruit that I thought I was going to. But let me just go around here real quickly and just see. This is a real quick process that you can do. Any of those limbs that are growing straight up or are not productive, see here, this one, that's nothing is on this. It's doing no good, and there's fruit at the end of it. Just selectively, you take those. Here's a limb that has, 12 inches of nothing on it. That's doing me no good. These that are going to continue to grow up. So you see those naked limbs right there? Those are doing us no good. Here, I don't want this tree going, too much further up. I'm going to take that back, those naked branches, and we'll cut those off. Here's a limb here that does not have, well, it does have a flower bud right back there. But you got 14 inches of growth here. It's got no fruit on it. I'm going to take that totally off. This one, for now, I'm going to take it off here. When I come back and do another walk, I'll probably take it back to here. All these little ends off, and what's that going to do? Produce new growth during the summer. There's a dead limb there. See that I missed? There's a dead one there. You can see here where I did some chasing those borers last year, and you know, it almost girdled that entire limb, which I thought I was going to lose this, but thankfully it's okay. See these naked limbs? I take them all off. Anything that's growing straight up, that one's growing towards the center of the tree, and we'll take that one down there. Here's one that's growing up and in towards the center. I'm going to bring that back down height-wise. I took a few fruits off of that, but that's okay. I did a graft here yesterday. My friend Seal brought me a variety that she grows that produces fruit in May, and this Alberta peach produces, its fruit ripens up in July. So I want to put, I ain't got room for another tree, so I want to put some different varieties on here that will give me a little bit of an earlier fruit. And there's a graft that I did yesterday. These dead or naked limbs, and here's a limb that has no fruit on it whatsoever. Nothing set. That's a useless limb. I'm going to head that back. There's some fruit there. I'm heading that back. That's a heading cut. There's two cuts to make, a thinning cut and a heading cut. And we'll head that back so it'll produce growth for next year. The end of this limb is dead. I can tell it. I couldn't tell that earlier. Any fruit on this? Yep, I cut that right back to it. Okay, let me give you an example of that thinning cut versus a heading cut. If I wanted to head this limb back where it will produce more growth, you cut that, head it back in towards the tree. Here's a limb that has absolutely no fruit on it whatsoever. The heading cut would be somewhere along here, so it would produce fruit. If I want to get rid of that, you do the thinning cut and take it all the way back here, and that thin that entire branch out. Get the idea of it? Here's a limb that that does have a fruit on it right there, but I want to cut that back. Naked, no leaves on these. Naked. So see now here, this limb, I don't see a bloom on it whatsoever. It's useless. It's not doing me any good taking energy from the tree. I want new growth coming out of there. New growth for next year's production. I hope that helps you out a little bit. And it's pretty easy to see. See, this is some dead material here that I didn't catch on my winter pruning. This limb is going to do nothing but cause problems. I'm going to take that back. And I hope that gives you a little idea of how I like to spring prune and produce new growth in the summer for next year's fruit. I'll do another walk around here when I'm through, but I hope you get the idea of spring pruning. You can apply this also to apricot, kind of the same way, but apricot produces fruit a little differently than peach does. Maybe I'll talk about that one in another day or two, give you some ideas. But peaches and nectarine, this is pretty well universal on it. I don't grow nectarine because I've never eaten one that was better than a peach. Some people have different opinions about that, but nectarine, this would work on too. All right, hope that helped you, and I'll do another video maybe in a day or two applying the same principle to apricot, but show you how it's different because they produce fruit the same but different. Happy gardening.